The torn parachute panel flutters against the broken bridge girder like a white flag of surrender, but Jake McNiece has never been one to quit. Crouched in the pre-dawn darkness beneath the stone arch spanning the Dutch Canal, he stares at the soggy TNT blocks scattered in the mud around his boots. Half his satchel charges are waterlogged from the jump, the primer cord is frayed, and somewhere in the fog above, German voices echo off the canal walls. The mission seemed straightforward enough during the briefing back in England. Drop behind enemy lines near Eindhoven, rig the canal bridge with explosives, deny the Germans a key crossing point during Operation Market Garden. Simple demolition work for the Filthy 13, McNiece's notorious squad of misfits and rebels within the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. But nothing about this September night has gone according to plan. The drop zone was wrong. Scattered his men across 3 miles of Dutch farmland. Half his explosives are missing, probably buried in some farmer's flooded field. And the bridge itself is larger and more heavily constructed than the intelligence photo suggested. Thick stone supports that will need precise placement and perfect timing to bring down. McNiece runs his fingers along the damp primer cord, testing its integrity. Behind him, Corporal Bowers crouches over the remaining TNT blocks, sorting the salvageable charges from the ruined ones. Private Ragland keeps watch from the embankment, his rifle trained on the fog-shrouded road where German patrol boots splash through puddles. "Mac, we got maybe 6 good charges left," Bowers whispers, his voice tight with exhaustion. "That ain't gonna be enough to drop this whole bridge." McNiece knows Bowers is right. Standard demolition doctrine calls for twice as many charges to guarantee a collapse on a structure this size. But standard doctrine assumes perfect conditions, dry explosives, and time to place everything properly. Out here in the cold Dutch darkness, with enemy patrols closing in and half his gear ruined, McNiece will have to rely on something more than doctrine. The white parachute panel catches his eye again, snagged on the bridge's central support beam. It's from his own chute, torn loose during the hard landing, that scattered his gear across the muddy field. Most paratroopers would see it as just debris, but McNiece sees possibility. The fabric could serve as a marker to help him place the charges with surgical precision on the bridge's weakest structural points. His hands shake slightly as he hefts one of the waterlogged TNT blocks, not from fear, but from exhaustion and the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a wet blanket. If he fails to bring down this bridge, German armor will pour across within hours during Market Garden's critical phase, potentially overrunning Allied positions and costing hundreds of lives. "Ragland," McNiece hisses, "how much time we got?" The private's response comes back urgent, but controlled. "Motor sounds getting louder, Mac. Maybe 10 minutes before they reach the bridge. 10 minutes to rig a demolition that should take 30. McNiece examines each remaining charge, his fingers working by instinct, checking fuses and testing connections. Around him, his men wait for orders, their trust in his abilities complete, despite his reputation for breaking rules and defying authority. From the embankment above, Lieutenant Morrison slides down the muddy slope, his boots squelching in the canal-side muck. The young officer's face is drawn with fatigue and the kind of worry that comes from watching plans fall apart in real time. "McNiece, what's your assessment?" Morrison asks, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "Can you bring it down with what we have?" McNiece doesn't look up from his work, still testing the integrity of a particularly waterlogged charge. "Sir, if we cluster everything on the center support and time it right, maybe, but it's going to be close." Morrison glances toward the road where German vehicle sounds grow steadily louder. The original plan called for a coordinated demolition across 3 bridges during Market Garden's opening phase, but radio contact with the other teams was lost hours ago. Now this single canal crossing has become the critical point, the difference between success and catastrophe for the scattered paratroopers trying to establish their foothold in Holland. "The thing is, Lieutenant," McNiece continues, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who's blown up everything from railroad bridges to German bunkers. We do this by the book with what we got, and there's a good chance we just damage the span instead of dropping it. Might make it look broken, but still leave it passable for tanks. Bowers looks up from his work-sorting charges. What are you thinking, Mac? McNiece points to the torn parachute panel hanging from the central beam. We use that as our reference point. Place everything right there. Use the stone arch to amplify the blast force. But we're gonna have to get real close to make sure the placement is perfect. The moral weight of the moment hangs heavy in the damp air. Morrison knows that ordering the demolition means committing to a course that can't be undone. If McNiece is wrong about the placement, if the charges fail to drop the bridge completely, they'll have wasted their only shot and alerted every German patrol within miles to their position. But if they wait for better conditions or more supplies, the approaching panzer column will secure the crossing and use it to outflank Allied positions throughout the Market Garden sector. Working in practice silence, McNiece and Bowers wade into the shallow water beneath the bridge. The canal is ice cold, numbing their legs as they maneuver the TNT blocks into position. McNiece uses the torn parachute panel as a reference point, placing each charge with mathematical precision against the stone arch. The primer cord snakes through the darkness like a deadly umbilical cord, connecting each charge to the central detonator. McNiece tests each connection twice, his fingers tracing the cord's path by feel alone. Every movement must be deliberate, every connection perfect. There will be no second chance in Market Garden's unforgiving timeline. Above them, Raglan's voice carries a new urgency. First vehicles coming into sight. Looks like motorcycles with a sidecar. Lieutenant Morrison crouches beside the detonator, watching McNiece work with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He's heard the stories about the Filthy 13's demolition expert, how McNiece once blew a bridge in Normandy with half the prescribed charges, how he improvised explosives from captured German ammunition when supplies ran low. But he's also heard about McNiece's clashes with authority, his tendency to modify orders based on what his instincts told him about the ground. "Mac," Morrison says quietly, "you sure about this placement? Once we blow, there's no going back." McNiece looks up from the charges, water dripping from his uniform, his face streaked with mud and exhaustion. "Lieutenant, I've been blowing things up since before the war. Worked demolitions in the oil fields back in Oklahoma. I know how structures fail, how to read the weak points. But I ain't gonna lie to you, this is gonna be close." In the distance, the rumble of German vehicles grows louder, accompanied by the measured tread of infantry boots. The sound echoes off the canal walls, making it difficult to judge exactly how many vehicles are approaching. But the methodical pace suggests a significant force, more than the scattered paratroopers can hope to engage directly. Bowers finishes connecting the last charge and backs away from the bridge. "That's it, Mac. Everything's wired and ready." McNiece remains in the water, staring up at the white parachute panel that marks the focal point of their improvised demolition. In a few minutes, that fabric will be vaporized along with several tons of stone and steel. But right now, it serves as a symbol of everything he's learned about making impossible situations work through stubborn determination and calculated risks. The weight of responsibility presses down on him like the cold Dutch sky, not just for the bridge or the mission, but for the men who trust him to get this right when everything else has gone wrong. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. "Everyone get to cover," McNiece announces, backing away from the bridge with the detonator in his hands. His men scramble up the embankment to a safe distance, taking position behind a stone wall that borders the canal. McNiece remains standing, staring at the bridge through the morning mist. The first German motorcycle appears through the fog, its headlight cutting through the darkness as it approaches the crossing. Behind it, he can make out the silhouettes of armored vehicles. The lead panzer emerges from the mist like a steel beast, its treads clanking against the cobblestone approach to the bridge. This is the moment that will define Market Garden's success or failure in this sector, whether German armor can use this crossing to outflank the scattered Allied airborne forces. McNiece grips the detonator handle, feeling its cold metal against his palm. Everything comes down to this moment: the timing, the placement, the desperate gamble of using damaged explosives to destroy a bridge that's too big for the job. His hands steady despite the exhaustion, despite the fear that's been building since the moment he realized how much was riding on his ability to improvise with insufficient gear. The panzer rolls onto the bridge's approach, its weight causing the entire structure to vibrate slightly. McNiece can feel that vibration through the stone wall, through the ground beneath his boots. The tank commander is visible in the cupola, scanning the fog-shrouded banks for signs of enemy activity. "Now, Mac," Bowers whispers urgently, "before they get across." But McNiece waits another heartbeat, watching the tank move toward the center span where his charges wait beneath the torn parachute panel. Timing is everything in demolitions. Too early, and you might only damage the approach. Too late, and you risk letting the armor escape to the far side. The panzer reaches the midpoint of the bridge, directly above McNiece's carefully placed charges. The white parachute fabric flutters in the morning breeze, marking the exact spot where tons of German steel meet his improvised demolition. McNiece pushes the plunger. The explosion tears through the pre-dawn silence like thunder, sending a column of flame and debris high into the air. The center span of the bridge disintegrates in a shower of stone and twisted steel, collapsing into the canal with a crash that echoes across the Dutch countryside. The panzer disappears into the gap, swallowed by the rushing water and rubble. Where moments before stood a vital German crossing point, now only wreckage and impassable water remain. The following vehicles halt at the approach, their headlights illuminating the destruction. Radio chatter erupts in frustrated German as the column realizes they'll need to find another route, buying precious time for Market Garden forces to strengthen their positions. As the smoke clears, McNiece watches debris settle in the canal below. The white parachute panel has vanished, vaporized along with the bridge span and the German tank. What the after-action report will never mention is the moment of pure terror that gripped him just before pushing the plunger. The sudden, overwhelming fear that his calculations were wrong, that the charges wouldn't be enough. Bowers slaps McNiece on the back, grinning through the mud and exhaustion. "You crazy bastard." I can't believe that worked. But McNiece doesn't smile. He stares at the rubble-filled canal, thinking about the report he'll have to write, how official documents will clean up the chaos and improvisation into neat, tactical language. They'll call it a successful demolition operation, but McNiece knows the truth. It was equal parts skill, desperation, and luck. What haunts him, even in this moment of tactical success, is how close they came to failure. If the primer cord had been damaged in one more place, if even one charge had failed to detonate properly, the bridge might have survived with only superficial damage. The German armor would have crossed within hours, and Market Garden's northern flank would have collapsed. Lieutenant Morrison approaches, his face reflecting relief and something else, a new understanding of what it means to improvise under impossible conditions. "McNiece, that was... How did you know the placement would work?" "I didn't, sir," McNiece replies quietly. "I made the best guess I could with what we had. Sometimes that's all you got, a guess and the willingness to live with what comes after." The truth he'll never put in any report is simpler and more terrifying. For those few seconds before the explosion, he genuinely didn't know if his improvised demolition would work. All the experience in the world, all the training and instinct, still came down to a moment of faith in his own judgment when lives depended on getting it right. Years later, when people ask about the photograph of him beside destroyed bridges, McNiece will remember this moment differently than the official accounts. Not the tactical success or the strategic impact, but the weight of responsibility and the thin line between heroism and disaster. How a rebellious demolition man with waterlogged explosives and a torn parachute panel managed to complete an impossible mission through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The sound of the collapse, steel giving way, stone crumbling, water rushing through debris, will follow him for decades. Sometimes the rumble of a freight train over a bridge brings it all back. The cold Dutch morning, the weight of the detonator in his hands, and the terrifying moment of not knowing if his best guess would be enough. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The German voices fade into the distance as the frustrated column searches for alternative crossings. McNiece and his team begin the careful work of gathering their gear, policing the area for any evidence of their improvised demolition techniques. The torn parachute panel that served as his reference point is gone, atomized in the blast that saved Market Garden's northern approach. Lieutenant Morrison helps McNiece coil the remaining primer cord, their movements automatic despite exhaustion. "How do I write this up?" he asks. "Higher headquarters is going to want details about how we dropped a bridge that size, with half the prescribed charges." "Keep it simple, sir," McNiece replies. "Bridge destroyed as ordered, mission accomplished." They don't need to know about the guesswork, but both men understand that something more significant happened beneath that Dutch bridge than a successful demolition. In the space between official orders and ground reality, McNiece had to choose between following doctrine and trusting his instincts. The choice he made, clustering charges on a single point, using a torn parachute panel as reference, timing the detonation by feel rather than formula, saved the mission but violated everything he'd been taught about proper demolition procedures. Ragland approaches from his watch position, rifle still at the ready. "More vehicles moving on the far side, Mac. Sounds like they're pulling back to find another crossing." The tactical victory is clear, but McNiece feels the familiar hollow sensation that follows successful missions. Relief mixed with exhaustion, satisfaction tempered by the knowledge of how close everything came to failure. In a few hours, runners will carry news of the bridge's destruction back to divisional headquarters. The event will become a line in a report, then a paragraph in a history book. What won't appear in those official accounts is the moment McNiece spent staring at his charges in the dark water, calculating odds and accepting responsibility for consequences he couldn't predict. The willingness to improvise when standard procedures weren't enough, the weight of making decisions that could save or doom the men, counting on his expertise. Bowers shoulders his rifle and falls into step beside McNiece as they move away from the canal. "Do you ever think about what happens after?" he asks. "When all this is over and we're back home?" McNiece considers the question, thinking about Oklahoma oil fields and the kind of work that doesn't require making life-and-death calculations with insufficient information. "I figure we'll find out," he says simply. 40 years later, at a reunion of Market Garden veterans, an elderly McNiece will stand beside a photograph of the destroyed bridge, listening to younger men describe his actions in terms of tactical brilliance and heroic determination. He'll nod and smile and sign autographs, but what he remembers most clearly is the weight of the detonator in his hands and the terrible moment of not knowing if his best judgment would be enough to save the mission and his men. The legend that survives in photographs and citations captures only the successful outcome, not the fear and uncertainty that preceded it. That burden belongs to the men who lived through the improvisation, who carried the memory of calculated risks and necessary gambles long after the bridges fell and the wars ended. If this story reminded you that behind every medal and mission report there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel. tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.